Hello, my dear friends. You are standing at a high, latticed window, the cool, intricately carved marble of the screen pressing against your fingertips. Below you, a paradise unfolds. Fountains whisper in star-shaped pools, casting shimmering light onto pathways of crushed red gravel. The air is heavy with the scent of jasmine and rose, a thick, sweet perfume that seems to coat everything. You see emerald-green parrots flitting between pomegranate trees, their calls like jewels scattered on the air. This is the Mughal Zinana, the legendary women's quarters, a world of impossible beauty and feminine grace. It's a place history remembers as a sanctuary. But let's be honest, if you were suddenly transported here with your modern sensibilities, you probably wouldn't survive the first week. The sheer, suffocating lack of privacy would undo you long before the politics did. Your eyes trace the geometric patterns of the jali, the marble screen. Each opening is a perfect hexagon, a star, a flower, framed by another and another, until the entire wall is a honeycomb of light and shadow. It is breathtakingly beautiful, a testament to an empire so wealthy it could afford to have its greatest artisans carve stone as if it were lace. From the outside, this screen renders you an invisible, unknowable mystery. It is a symbol of your prestige, your protection. But from the inside, as you stand here now, you begin to feel its other purpose. It is a barrier. You can look, but you cannot leave. The world is a mosaic of tiny, disconnected fragments seen through 1,000 little windows. You can never see the whole picture. This is the first layer of the grand illusion. The zinana, a Persian word simply meaning of the women, was presented to the world, and to the women within it, as a privilege. It was a gilded cage, yes, but the emphasis was always on the gilding. You are surrounded by a soft world. Cushions are piled high on carpets so thick your feet sink into them. The walls are not just painted but adorned with pietra dura, intricate inlay of lapis lazuli, carnelian, and jade, forming vines and flowers that seem to grow from the plaster itself. Servants, all women, move with a silent, practiced grace, offering you chilled sherbet in silver cups or trays of candied fruits. There is no harshness here. No loud noises. The world of men of war, of commerce, of dust and sweat is kept far, far away. This is your reward for being the mother, the wife, the sister, or the daughter of an emperor. You are a treasure, and this is your exquisite, jewel-encrusted box. But stay a little longer. Let your eyes adjust to the soft light filtering through the marble. The silence, you begin to notice, is not entirely peaceful. It's watchful. You feel a gaze on the back of your neck, and when you turn, you see a senior lady of the court watching you from across the courtyard, her expression unreadable. A serving girl who seemed so deferential a moment ago lingers just a little too long, her head bowed, but her ears open. You realize the walls of this paradise are not just stone. They are made of eyes and ears. Every word you speak is a potential commodity, every friendship a potential alliance or threat. This is the shocking reality beneath the silk and marble. The zinana is not a sanctuary. It is one of the most sophisticated surveillance states imaginable. It has to be. Within these walls live hundreds, sometimes thousands of women, the emperor's mother, his wives, his concubines, his daughters, sisters, aunts, cousins, and all of their attendants and servants. It is a vast, self-contained city, and its primary product is legitimacy. The emperor's power rests on the unshakable belief that his heirs are his own. A single rumor of infidelity, a single question about a prince's paternity, could shatter the empire, sparking a bloody civil war for the throne. And so, your life is governed by one overwhelming principle: control. The beautiful jali screens keep men out, but they also keep you in, a prisoner of your own prestige. The perimeter of the zinana is patrolled by layers of guards. First, the eunuchsmen who are considered safe, who can bridge the world of the court and the world of the harem without posing a threat to the purity of the bloodline. They are often powerful figures in their own right, trusted advisors to the emperor, but here they are your wardens. Beyond them are the Urjugis, elite female warriors, often from distant lands like Tartary or Uzbekistan, armed with spears and bows. They are utterly loyal to the emperor, and they police the women within. They are the physical manifestation of the system, women hired to control other women. This is the genius and the cruelty of the system. It's largely self-policing. A whisper from a rival wife to a eunuch guard can lead to your ruin. A servant eager for promotion can report a private conversation. Your own ladies-in-waiting are both your confidants and your keepers, their fortunes tied to yours, but their survival dependent on staying in the good graces of those more powerful. It's a social landscape that feels uncannily modern, like the most toxic form of social media, where every action is performed for an unseen audience, where one misstep can lead to being publicly shamed and cancelled. Only here, the consequences are far more permanent. Your every friendship is scrutinized, your moods are noted, your health is a matter of state record. Privacy is the one luxury this opulent world cannot afford. And why would anyone accept this? Why would a life of such intense scrutiny be considered an honor? Because the system was framed around the concept of izzat, or honor, and purdah, the veil or curtain. To be shielded from the eyes of common men was a sign of immense status. The more important you were, the more secluded you were. The Empress herself was almost a myth, a being of unimaginable prestige who never had to walk on common ground or breathe common air. This isolation was packaged as reverence. You were not a prisoner, you were a deity in a temple, too sacred for the profane world. Your gilded cage wasn't a punishment, it was a testament to your pricelessness. It was a brilliant piece of political theatre, convincing the treasures that their box was, in fact, a throne. But to live within this theatre, to breathe its carefully managed air, required a constant reinforcement of the illusion. The beauty had to be overwhelming, the luxury absolute, to distract from the ever-present watchfulness. And to maintain this fragile paradise, to make the confinement feel like heaven, another layer of sensory artifice was essential. The air itself had to be curated, sculpting your experience and masking the scent of fear. It had to smell not of stone walls, but of eternal spring. The air you breathe is the first and most powerful tool of this illusion. It is thick, a sweet, velvety curtain of scent that wraps around you the moment you enter the Zenana's inner courts. It is the smell of power. Before a visitor even lays eyes on the Empress or a high-ranking princess, they are met with her fragrance. It arrives before she does, a herald announcing her status. This is not the simple splash of rosewater you might imagine. This is a complex, layered, and brutally expensive olfactory assault. You walk past a fountain, and the water is not water, it is laced with kira, the heady, almost fruity essence of pandan flower. The polished floors are wiped down daily with cloths, steeped in sandalwood oil, leaving a soft, woody bass note that rises with the heat of the day. Look closer at the small, intricate silver spheres hanging from the archways or placed in niches in the walls. These are attardans, perfume holders, pierced with tiny holes. Inside, cotton balls are soaked in attar, the purest steam-distilled oil of a single flower. The most prized, of course, is the legendary attar-I gulab, the oil of roses. It is said that it takes over 20,000 pounds of rose petals to produce a single pound of this oil. It is liquid gold, and its scent is so potent that a single drop on your wrist will last for days. The air in these halls is a symphony of such scents: jasmine from the south, narcissus from the mountains of Kashmir, earthy vetiver, and the deep, animalic notes of musk and ambergris. Ambergris, a waxy substance from the belly of a sperm whale that washes ashore, was worth more than its weight in gold, a strange, sea-worn stone that held the power to make a fragrance last an eternity. Your clothes, your hair, the very water you bathe in, are all infused with this fragrant shield. You are not meant to smell human. You are meant to smell of paradise, an otherworldly being, an extension of the garden outside. But now, lean in closer to this beautiful illusion. Breathe past the roses and the jasmine. What is that other, fainter smell, hidden beneath the artifice? It is the smell of humanity. It is the faint, acrid tang of sweat, the smell of unwashed bodies, of sickness and of waste. This is the shocking reality that the perfume is designed to conquer. For all its marble fountains and silken cushions, the Zenana is a city without plumbing. It is home to thousands of people, and they all have bodies that function in distinctly unpoetic ways. The latrines, though often beautifully tiled and built in discreet locations, are essentially pits. They are emptied by hand, by the lowest caste of servants, the untouchables, in the dead of night. The beautiful ritual of bathing, so often depicted in miniature paintings, was a major logistical undertaking. There was no hot water on tap. Water was hauled by servants from wells or reservoirs, heated over open fires in massive cauldrons and then carried in ewers to the hammams or bathhouses. It was a laborious, time-consuming process. A daily soak was a luxury even for an empress. For the hundreds of other women, the lesser wives, the concubines, the attendants, a full bath might be a weekly or even less frequent affair. The daily hygiene. It was a quick wash with a jug of water and a basin. And then there is the great, unspoken reality of a city of women, menstruation. With no disposable products, women relied on rags of soft cotton cloth. These had to be washed, by hand, and dried discreetly, away from all eyes. Imagine the sheer scale of this task for a population of 1,000 women. An entire hidden industry of washing, boiling, and managing soiled linen existed within the zenana, a constant, necessary, and frankly, unhygienic cycle, all carried out by women whose job it was to handle the unclean aspects of life so that the high-ranking ladies could maintain their illusion of effortless purity. The heavy perfumes, the incense burning in every corner, the fragrant smoke of burning aloes wood, these were not just for pleasure. They were a weapon. They were a form of olfactory warfare against the simple, unavoidable biology of thousands of people living in close quarters. So why was this contradiction tolerated? The explanation lies in a worldview that is both deeply pragmatic and profoundly symbolic. The prevailing medical belief of the time, inherited from Greek and Persian traditions, was the miasma theory. It held that disease was caused by bad air or miasmas, foul smells rising from rotting matter, swamps, and human waste. Sickness was literally a smell that you breathed in. Therefore, to surround yourself with powerful, pleasant fragrances was not an indulgence, it was a critical form of preventative medicine. A room that smelled of roses and sandalwood was, by definition, a healthy room. The perfume was a shield, a fragrant bubble that protected you from the pestilence of the outside world and the potential sickness within. Furthermore, scent was a profound marker of status. The common person smelled of their labor, of dust, of sweat, of onions, of animal dung. The elite, by contrast, smelled of leisure, of wealth, of things that grow in walled gardens. By dousing yourself in a tar that cost more than a worker's yearly wage, you were creating a sensory barrier between you and the low classes. Your fragrance was a declaration of your power, a way of saying, my very air is different from your air. The illusion of the ever-fragrant, pristine woman of the zenana was maintained by a hidden army of servants who managed the messy reality. The shocking truth is that the more heavenly a woman smelled, the more earthly, unpleasant labor was being performed, out of sight, on her behalf. Her fragrant purity was directly proportional to the unclean work of others. This mastery of illusion, of controlling perception through sensory means, was the key to power within the zenana. The woman who could best navigate this world of surfaces and secrets, who understood that power was not about what was real but about what people could be made to believe, could rise to unbelievable heights. And no one in the history of the Mughal Empire understood this better than a woman who started as an outsider and became the true ruler, a woman who wielded absolute authority, not from a throne, but from behind that very same lattice screen you are peering through now. You are now in the presence of royalty. But you don't see her. You see the effect of her. You are in a grand hall within the zenana, and the most powerful women of the empire are gathered. They are a sea of silk and jewels, their quiet chatter like the rustling of leaves. They are all waiting. Then, a subtle shift in the air. The scent of roses and jasmine intensifies. A hush falls. From behind a screen of impossibly intricate sandalwood, a voice speaks. It is calm, melodic, yet it carries an authority that is absolute. This is Nur Jahan, the light of the world. The glamorous illusion of Nur Jahan is that of the perfect empress consort. History remembers her as the great love of the Emperor Jahangir, a woman of unparalleled beauty and refined taste. She was a poet, a brilliant architect who designed some of the most beautiful tombs and gardens in the Mughal capital of Agra. She was a fashion icon. The fabrics you see around you, gossamer-thin silks and cottons with delicate floral prints, were of her design. She created new styles of clothing, new patterns for carpets, new blends of perfume. When she held court for the ladies of the zenana, her pronouncements on art, literature, and fashion were not mere suggestions, they were imperial decrees of taste. She was the sun around which the entire, glittering world of the zenana revolved. To the world outside, and even to many within, she was the ultimate feminine ideal, cultured, beautiful, creative, and, seemingly, a devoted wife who existed to delight her emperor husband. She was the perfect ornament for the throne. But now, come with me. Let's slip behind that sandalwood screen, into the space where the real power resides. Here is the shocking truth. Nur Jahan was not the ornament on the throne. She was the throne. while her husband, the Emperor Jahangir, drifted deeper and deeper into a stupor of wine and opium. Nur Jahan ruled the Mughal Empire, and she did it all from within the confines of the zenana, using the very instruments of her seclusion as weapons of command. Imagine the daily scene at the Charaka, the ornate imperial balcony where the emperor was required to show himself to his people each morning. It was a vital piece of political theatre, proof that the king was alive and the empire was stable. Jahangir would be there, swaying slightly, his eyes glazed, waving to the crowds below. He was the visible symbol of power. But just behind him, concealed by a fine marble jaili screen, sat Nur Jahan. As petitions were read out, as generals gave their reports, as ministers sought guidance, it was her voice, a clear, decisive whisper that instructed Jahangir on what to say. It was she who approved troop movements, she who appointed governors, she who decided matters of law and tax. The most powerful men in India were bowing not to the man on the balcony, but to the invisible woman behind the screen. Her audacity was breathtaking. She was the first and only Mughal empress to have coins struck in her name, right alongside her husband's. One minting famously read, by order of King Jahangir, gold has 100 splendours added to it by receiving the name of Nur Jahan, the Badshah become the Emperor Queen. She issued farmans, or imperial edicts, under her own seal. To get anything done in the empire, you had to gain her favour. Foreign ambassadors, like the English envoy Sir Thomas Roe, wrote home in bewildered amazement, reporting that the nobles of the court were like slaves to her will. She would hold audiences with her ministers, but always from behind a curtain. They would enter the room, prostrate themselves before an empty space, and address their reports to a screen, from which a disembodied female voice would question, command, and dismiss them. They were running an empire on the orders of a ghost. How could this happen in such a fiercely patriarchal world? First, Jahangir's adoration of her was total and complete. He was a deeply intelligent man, but one beset by addiction and melancholy, and he recognized her superior political skill. He trusted her implicitly and delegated his authority to her openly, famously declaring that he had sold his empire to his clever wife for a cup of wine and a bowl of soup. He gave her the legal and moral authority to act in his stead. But more importantly, Nur Jahan was a genius who understood the system better than anyone. She didn't shatter the gilded cage of the zenana, she redecorated it and turned it into a fortress. She mastered the art of illusion that we've been exploring. She used her purdah, her invisibility, to her advantage. It made her untouchable, mysterious, and unaccountable in the way a male ruler would be. Men could not confront her, challenge her to a duel, or publicly question her honor in the way they could with a rival male. She operated on a different plane, protected by the very rules meant to constrain her. She built a powerful network of allies, placing her brilliant father and brother in the highest positions of government, creating a faction so powerful it was known as the junta. The zenana, under her command, ceased to be a holding pen for beautiful women and became the political and strategic centre of the Mughal Empire. The spies, as we will soon see, were everywhere. Her authority was absolute. Her reign represents the ultimate expression of the zenana's hidden power. But even for a woman as powerful as Nur Jahan, the fundamental rules of this world still applied. Her political authority was inextricably linked to her status as the emperor's beloved, and that status was tied to the potent illusion of her timeless beauty. She, like every other woman in the zenana, had to participate in the daily, demanding rituals of self-creation, crafting a flawless facade. And that facade, that perfect, luminous complexion so admired in miniature paintings, was often built from a foundation of pure poison. Your attention is drawn to a princess seated on a velvet cushion. She is preparing for the evening. A servant holds up a polished silver mirror, and in it, her face glows with an almost supernatural luminescence. Her skin is impossibly smooth, a flawless canvas of pale cream. Her lips are a deep, stained red, like crushed pomegranate seeds, and her eyes are dramatically outlined in a dark, smoky coal. This is the idealized image of Mughal beauty, immortalized in countless miniature paintings. It is a look of serene, otherworldly perfection. But now, look closer at the small, ornate pots and vials on the silver tray beside the princess. Let's examine the ingredients of this luminous beauty. The shocking reality is that the quest for the moon-like face was often a dance with death. That coveted pale glow was frequently achieved with a cosmetic powder called safta, a white pigment that gave the skin a thick, smooth, porcelain finish. The key ingredient in safta was lead carbonate, We now know it as white lead, a substance so toxic that its use in paint is banned in most of the world. But for centuries, women willingly and unknowingly applied this potent neurotoxin directly to their faces, necks and arms day after day. The immediate effects were desirable. Lead tightens the skin, hides blemishes and provides that sought-after pale sheen. But the long-term effects were devastating. The lead was slowly absorbed through the skin, leading to chronic poisoning. The symptoms were insidious of have been completely understood at the time of bulb and memory loss, irritability, fatigue, damage to the nervous system. As a woman used more and more lead powder to hide the blemishes and greying skin that were in fact caused by the lead itself, she would spiral into a cycle of ever-increasing toxicity. The very substance used to create the illusion of perfect health was systematically destroying it. And it doesn't stop with lead. Look at her eyes, so dramatically lined. That black kohl, or kajal, was a staple of beauty for men and women alike. It was believed to protect the eyes from the sun's glare and even ward off the evil eye. It was often made by burning clarified butter or medicinal herbs and collecting the soot. But to make it darker and more dramatic, other ingredients were added. Sometimes, that ingredient was finely ground galenalid sulfide. So, while lining their eyes to protect them, they were potentially introducing another form of lead directly into the delicate membranes of the eye. Even the vibrant red on her lips and cheeks, known as alter, could hold dangers. While often derived from innocuous sources like beetroot or lacti, some preparations contained cinnabar mercury sulfide. A beautiful, bright red mineral, cinnabar is also the primary ore of mercury. Like lead, mercury is a powerful neurotoxin. Absorbed through the skin or ingested in small amounts by licking the lips, it could lead to tremors, mood swings, and severe damage to the brain and kidneys. These women were painting their faces with heavy metals, transforming themselves into beautiful, shimmering, but slowly poisoning works of art. Why on earth would a society so obsessed with health and purity embrace such dangerous practices? The answer lies in the chasm between their understanding of chemistry and their aesthetic ideals. They had no concept of heavy metal poisoning. They saw only the immediate, desirable results. The connection between a face powder and organ failure years later was impossible to make. Instead, these lingering, chronic illnesses would have been attributed to anything else, a curse from a rival, a humoral imbalance, or the ever-present miasma we discussed earlier. Furthermore, the illusion was everything. In the competitive world of the zenana, beauty was a form of currency. It could secure an emperor's favor, elevate one's status, and ensure the future of one's children. The pressure to conform to the ideal was immense. If the reigning beauty of the court had a luminous white complexion, then every other woman had to achieve it as well, whatever the cost. They were not being foolish. They were being pragmatic in a system where their appearance was one of their most valuable assets. The risk of falling from favor was immediate and terrifying, while the risk from the makeup itself was invisible and unknown. It was a tragic, slow-motion sacrifice, a testament to the fact that for the women of the zenana, the beautiful lie was often more important for survival than the ugly truth. The ultimate purpose of this beauty, this dangerous, curated perfection, was to attract and hold the emperor's attention, to fulfill a woman's primary role, to produce a healthy heir. But the very apex of this feminine duty, the act of childbirth, was itself a site of shocking brutality, a world away from the serene image of motherhood. And no story illustrates this better than that of the woman for whom the most beautiful tomb in the world was built. You are now standing in a moonlit garden, your feet silent on the cool marble path. Across the tranquil waters of the Yamuna River, a structure floats as if in a dream. It is a building that seems to be made not of stone, but of captured moonlight and memory. This is the Taj Mahal. The glamorous illusion of this place is perhaps the most powerful and enduring in the world. It is the ultimate monument to love, a testament to the devotion of an emperor, Shah Jahan, for his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, the chosen one of the palace. The story we all know is a fairy tale, a love so profound that when the empress died, her heartbroken husband poured the entire wealth of his empire into building her an earthly paradise to await her in the afterlife. The building is flawless, symmetrical, and serene. It speaks of a love that was pure, poetic, and perfect. Mumtaz Mahal herself is remembered as a cherished, almost saintly figure, the quiet, beautiful consort who was the emperor's constant companion and the mother of his 14 children. Her life, as told by the building, seems to have been as serene and perfect as its architecture. But let's push open the heavy, silver doors of that story and step into the room where Mumtaz Mahal spent her final hours. The air here is not scented with jasmine. It is thick with the metallic smell of blood and fear. The shocking reality behind the world's greatest love story is the brutal, terrifying, and utterly unanesthetized world of muffled childbirth. Mumtaz Mahal died at the age of 38, not from some poetic wasting illness, but from a postpartum hemorrhage after delivering her 14th child in 30 hours of agonizing labor. Her story, far from being one of serene motherhood, is a stark reminder of the single greatest threat to a woman's life in the zinana, the royal womb. Imagine the scene. Mumtaz is not in a grand palace in Agra, but in a temporary campaign tent in Berhampur, a provincial outpost hundreds of miles from the capital. The emperor is there to quell a rebellion. She, as his devoted companion, has travelled with him, despite being heavily pregnant. The hospital is a designated section of a tent. The room is crowded with female relatives, midwives and servants, their whispers and prayers filling the hot, tense air. The midwives or days are experienced, their knowledge passed down through generations. They are skilled in massage, in positioning, in using herbal concoctions to try and ease the pain or speed the labor. But their medical knowledge is based entirely on tradition and observation. They have no understanding of germ theory, of infection, or of the internal mechanics of a complicated birth. For 30 hours, Mumtaz endures a pain we can barely comprehend. There are no epidurals, no painkillers beyond what opium or wine could offer, and these were often withheld for fear of harming the baby or slowing the labor. Every intervention is manual and external. The midwife might are bold to turn the baby from the outward. We use traditional, somewhat novel techniques to try and force the delivery. When the baby, a girl named Gauhara Begum, is finally born, the ordeal is not over. The bleeding won't stop. The placenta has not been fully delivered. The midwives are now frantic, their traditional remedies useless against a major internal hemorrhage. They have no surgical tools, no way to stop the bleeding, no concept of a blood transfusion. Shah Jahan, waiting anxiously outside, is told his wife is dying. He rushes to her side, and she reportedly looks at him, asks him to care for their children, and dies in his arms. This was the grim reality for every woman in the zinana, regardless of her rank. While their pregnancies were celebrated and their health monitored, the act of birth was a life or death gamble. And it was a gamble they were forced to take again, and again, and again. Having many children, especially sons, was the primary political duty of a royal wife. It secured the succession and strengthened the emperor's lineage. Mumtaz Mahal's 14 pregnancies in 19 years of marriage were not an accident. They were her job. She was, in essence, constantly pregnant or recovering from childbirth for her entire adult life. This relentless cycle of pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding took an immense toll on her body, leaving her progressively weaker and more vulnerable to the exact complication that eventually killed her. So why was this barbaric reality accepted? Why was the empress of the world's richest empire subjected to a death that seems so preventable to us? The answer lies in a combination of cultural and medical factors. Childbirth was exclusively a woman's affair. Male physicians were strictly forbidden from the zinana, and even if they had been allowed, their knowledge of obstetrics was limited and often more dangerous than the midwives. The female sphere of the zinana, so protective in some ways, became a medical isolation ward in others. The sanctity of purdah meant that a woman's life might be sacrificed to protect her from the gaze of a male doctor. Furthermore, death in childbirth was simply an accepted fact of life, a tragedy so common it was seen as God's will. It was viewed as a woman's battlefield, her moment of ultimate sacrifice for the dynasty. Mumtaz Mahal's death, while a source of profound personal grief for Shah Jahan, was also framed as a noble, almost holy, end. The suffering was romanticized, becoming part of the legend. The Taj Mahal, then, is a monument built not just on love, but on a foundation of female pain. It is a beautiful, marble veil drawn over the terrifying, bloody reality of a woman's biological destiny in the muffle world. The serene tomb erases the agonizing death, replacing it with an image of eternal peace. The death of an empress was a public tragedy. But within the zinana, information was the most valuable currency. The details of Mumtaz's death, the whispers of the midwives, the panicked commands of the attendants, the emperor's cries of grief would have been noted, stored and analyzed. For in the enclosed, watchful world of the zinana, every piece of information, no matter how personal, was a potential tool in a silent, continuous war of influence. Let's linger for a moment in the aftermath of that tragedy. The official story of Mumtaz Mahal's death is one of sorrow and piety. But you are inside the zenana now, and you can feel the subtle shift in the currents of power. The air, once thick with grief, is now charged with something else, opportunity. A power vacuum has been created. The emperor is consumed by his mourning, leaving a space at the center of the court. Who will fill it? Which of his surviving wives will gain influence? Which of his older sons will now be seen as the heir apparent? The answers to these questions are being decided not in the grand council chambers, but right here in the quiet courtyards and corridors of the women's quarters. The glamorous illusion of the zenana is that of a place of leisure of women engaged in gentle pastimes, playing chess, reading poetry, listening to music, and, of course, gossiping. The image is one of a feminine triviality, of conversations about romance, fashion, and petty jealousies. The male chroniclers of the court often dismissed this world as being of no political importance, a gilded cage filled with beautiful but silly birds. They saw the endless chatter as the natural state of women, a harmless way to pass the long, secluded hours. The whispers that drifted out from behind the jolly screens were just that, whispers, background noise to the serious business of men running an empire. But let's listen more closely to that chatter. Let's sit with a group of ladies in waiting as they share a dish of pistachios and candied rose petals. The shocking reality is that this gossip is one of the most sophisticated and ruthless intelligence-gathering operations in the world. The zenana is not a hotbed of trivialities. It is the empire's secret service, its sire and mystics rolled into one, and it is run entirely by women. Every whisper is a data point. Every rumor is a potential weapon. Here's how it works. You, as a high-ranking lady, have your own retinue of servants, the canis, sahalis, and bandis. These are not just maids. They are your eyes and ears. Your most trusted attendant has a sister who is married to the servant of a powerful general. Through her, you learn that this general has been complaining about his lack of promotion and has been secretly meeting with a rival prince. Another of your servants is having a romance with a eunuch guard who oversees the delivery of supplies to the palace. From him, you learn that a certain nobleman is stockpiling grain and weapons in his provincial estate, far more than he should need. A court musician, a woman allowed into the inner sanctums, tells you which of the emperor's ministers seemed nervous after a private audience and which one left smiling. This raw intelligence flows upwards. The servants report to their mistresses. The lesser wives and concubines report to the more powerful wives or to the emperor's mother. The information is collated, cross-referenced, and analyzed within the zenana's upper echelons. It is a vast, organic, human-based intelligence network. The women of the zenana know who is in debt, who is having an affair, who is drinking too much, who is secretly practicing a forbidden religion, and who is plotting treason. They know the secrets of the male court, because the men of the court talk. They talk to their wives, their servants, their tailors, their grooms. And all those people are connected, through family and community, to the women inside the zenana. The men believe they are operating in a world of their own, but they are living in a fishbowl, and the women are watching from every angle. This information is then weaponized. A well-placed rumor, whispered into the right ear, can destroy a man's career. Does a general seem to be getting too powerful? A story about his wife's supposed infidelity might be circulated, shaming him and making him a laughingstock at court. Is a minister opposing a policy favored by the empress? Information about his secret debts could be subtly passed to the emperor, making him seem unreliable and corrupt. Blackmail is not a dirty word here. It is a fundamental tool of statecraft. Remember the powerful Nur Jahan? Her grip on the empire was maintained by this very web of whispers. She knew the weaknesses of every important man in the kingdom, and she used that knowledge to ensure their loyalty. Why was this system not only tolerated, but essential to the empire? It existed because of the very nature of muffle power. The emperor, isolated by his own majesty, was surrounded by ambitious men. He could never be sure who was truly loyal and who was simply waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. The official channels of information his ministers and generals are all compromised, as they would only ever tell him what they wanted him to hear. The zenana network provided a vital, unfiltered backchannel. It was the emperor's secret weapon, a way to check the power of his own court. He would listen to the gossip from his mother or his favorite wife, because he knew it was often more truthful than the official reports from his vizier. This turned the women of the zenana into formidable political players. Their power was indirect, wielded through influence and information, but it was no less real for that. They were not passive beauties, they were spymasters. The idle chatter was a perfect cover, allowing them to conduct their intelligence operations in plain sight, dismissed by the men who were their targets as mere women's talk. The very sexism that sought to confine them gave them their greatest strength, the power of being underestimated. But this world of secrets and whispers had its own dangers. What happens when the information is about sickness, not politics? What happens when a life is on the line, and the only person who can help is a woman trapped within the same system of illusion and secrecy? Imagine a fever has broken out in a secluded corner of the zenana. One of the lesser concubines is desperately ill. Her skin is hot to the touch, and a rash is spreading across her body. Panic, carefully concealed, begins to ripple through the attendants. Sickness is a terrifying enemy here. It threatens the carefully constructed illusion of a healthy, pristine paradise. In this moment of crisis, all eyes turn to a figure who is both revered and feared. She is not a princess or a wife, but a hakima, a female physician. She carries a small leather bag filled with vials of dried herbs, mineral powders and curious-looking instruments. The glamorous illusion of the female physicians of the Mughal court is that they were enlightened, almost magical healers. They were highly respected figures, often coming from families of physicians and trained by their fathers or brothers. They were literate, intelligent women who held a unique position of trust. Known as tabibas or hakimas, they were the only ones who could medically treat the thousands of women of the zenana, preserving the sanctity of purdah by making male doctors unnecessary. They understood the female body in a way no man could. Miniature paintings might depict them as serene, wise women, gently taking a patient's pulse surrounded by an aura of calm competence. They were the guardians of the zenana's health, the keepers of its secret physical well-being. But let's step closer to the sickbed and watch the hakima at work. The shocking reality is that her medical knowledge, while vast, was a bewildering mix of astute observation and what we would consider dangerous quackery. Her medicine was not based on science as we know it, but on the ancient Greco-Arabic system of Yunani medicine. This system revolved around the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. A healthy person had these four fluids in perfect balance. Sickness was simply an imbalance of the humours. A fever, for example, was an excess of hot and dry humours. The hakima's entire diagnostic and treatment plan is based on this idea. She will begin by examining the patient's pulse and urine. The pulse is not just about rate, she is feeling for its qualities. It's strong, weak, wiry, thready. Each quality indicates a different humoral imbalance. She will hold a vial of the patient's urine up to the light, studying its colour, sediment, and even its smell, looking for clues. Having diagnosed the fever as a hot condition, her treatment will be to apply cold remedies. She might prescribe a diet of cucumbers and melon. She may create a paste from sandalwood and rosewater, both considered cooling, to apply to the patient's forehead. These are harmless enough. But if they don't work, the treatments become more extreme. She might resort to bloodletting. Believing the fever is caused by an excess of hot blood, she will make a small incision in a vein, often in the arm, and drain a specific amount of blood into a bowl, hoping to restore balance. This, of course, would weaken an already sick patient, increase the risk of infection and potentially lead to fatal anemia. Or she might try purging. She will administer a powerful emetic made from herbs, forcing the patient to vomit violently, or a strong laxative to purge the body from the other end. The goal is to expel the excess bile that she believes is causing the sickness. For a patient already dehydrated by fever, this could be a death sentence. And then there are the medicines themselves. In her bag, she has pearls and coral, which would be ground into a fine powder and mixed with honey. They were believed to be powerful cold remedies, excellent for fevers and palpitations. She might have a bezoar stone, a hard, calcified mass found in the stomach of a goat, which was considered a universal antidote to poison and a potent treatment for melancholy. These were fantastically expensive and highly prized. She might also have metallic compounds, preparations of mercury, arsenic, and lead, which were used in tiny, carefully measured doses, believed to have powerful purifying properties. She is, in essence, gambling, throwing a bizarre collection of folk wisdom, philosophical theory, and potent toxins at the disease, hoping something will work. Why was this desperate, often dangerous, medicine the standard of care for the most powerful women in the empire? The answer lies, once again, in a worldview that merged the physical and the metaphysical. The humoral theory was not just medicine, it was a complete cosmology that explained the entire universe. Everything plants, seasons, emotions, stars was categorized as hot, cold, wet, or dry. It was a logical, internally consistent system that made sense of a chaotic world. The Hakima's remedies were not random, they were based on this deep, complex, and universally accepted philosophy. To question her methods would be like questioning the very laws of nature. Furthermore, the element of ritual and faith was just as important as the physical remedy. The Hakima would murmur prayers as she mixed her compounds. The value of the ingredients mattered. A medicine made from ground pearls was believed to be more powerful than one made from a common herb, not just because of its physical properties, but because its very preciousness added to its magical potency. The patient's belief in the treatment was a huge part of its perceived efficacy. In a world without antibiotics, this combination of psychological reassurance and a roll of the physiological dice was the best they had. The Hakima was respected not because she cured everyone, but because she fought the battle against sickness with the only weapons their worldview provided. She was a figure of immense authority, a woman whose hands held the power of life and death, even if that power rested on a foundation of brilliant, dangerous illusion. Her status, like the jewels used in her medicines, was both a symbol of wealth and a sign of the immense, crushing weight of expectation she carried. Now, let your eyes drift from the Hakima's bag of curious remedies to the women she serves. Look at the Empress, perhaps Nur Jahan herself, reclining on a divan. She is a spectacle of wealth. The tunic is woven with threads of pure gold. The fingers are heavy with rings, each one centered on a diamond the size of a quail's egg. The 5-strand pearl necklace, each pearl perfectly round and lustrous, hangs to her waist. Her turban is adorned with a spray of emeralds and a plume held in place by a ruby of breathtaking size. She is not merely wearing jewelry, she is embodying the wealth of the Mughal Empire. The glamorous illusion is one of effortless opulence. In paintings and chronicles, this river of jewels is presented as a natural state of being. The women of the Zenana are beautiful vessels for the display of imperial treasure. The gems seem light as air, a glittering accent to their grace and beauty. This display is a crucial form of political communication. It projects an image of limitless resources and unshakable power. When a foreign envoy or a provincial governor is granted a rare audience even from behind a screen, this overwhelming display of wealth is meant to awe them into submission. It says, "We are the center of the world. Our coffers are endless. Do not even think of challenging us. The jewels are a form of armor, a dazzling defense against any doubt of the dynasty's might. But let's strip away the romance and feel the physical truth of this display. The shocking reality is the crushing, painful, and damaging weight of these gems. This is not the lightweight, 14-karat gold jewelry of the modern world. This is solid, 24-karat gold, incredibly dense and heavy. A single one of those thick, solid gold bangles worn stacked on each arm could weigh over a pound. Now multiply that. The necklaces, the anklets, the intricate belts, the headpieces, a formal outfit for a high-ranking woman could easily mean carrying an extra 20 to 30 pounds of metal and stone on her body. Imagine the physical toll. Your earlobes, pierced in multiple places, are stretched and pulled down by the sheer weight of enormous earrings and pearl tassels, often leading to permanent disfigurement. The delicate bones of your neck ache under the strain of necklaces that are less like jewelry and more like jeweled yokes. You feel a constant, grinding pressure on your collarbones. After a few hours of sitting in state, a deep, throbbing headache sets in from the weight of the sarpek, the turban ornament, and the strings of pearls stitched into your headdress. The solid gold anklets or pails are so heavy that they chafe the skin raw and make walking a slow, deliberate, and often painful effort. This isn't just about special occasions. Even a simple daily outfit for a princess would include several pounds of gold. The women of the Zenana lived with a constant, low-level physical discomfort that was an accepted part of their high status. There are accounts of women developing chronic back pain, neck problems, and skin ailments from the constant friction and pressure of their finery. The very symbol of their privilege was a source of perpetual physical stress. It was, quite literally, a golden cage, one that weighed you down and restricted your movement. The illusion was one of divine, floating grace. The reality was a painful, earthly burden. So why endure this? Why willingly subject oneself to this daily discomfort? The reason is that in the Mughal court, wealth was not an abstract concept. It had to be made visible. It had to be worn. The emperor and his family were the living embodiment of the state's treasury. Their bodies were billboards for imperial prosperity. A woman's worth and status within the zenana were often directly correlated to the value of the jewels she was given by the emperor. To refuse to wear them, or to wear fewer than a rival, would be a political misstep. It would signal a fall from favor, a loss of status. The pain was the price of power. Furthermore, this immense weight served as a form of social control. It enforced a certain kind of behavior. You cannot run, or work, or even move quickly when you are laden with 30 pounds of gold and gems. The weight forces you into a slow, stately, dignified posture. It physically prevents you from being anything other than a living statue, a serene object for display. The discomfort was a constant reminder of your role. You are not a person who does things, you are a person to whom things are done, a beautiful object to be admired. The physical burden of the jewels reinforced the social confinement of the zenana itself. This culture of display created a paradox. These women were surrounded by, and literally covered in, a fortune in portable wealth. Yet, they had very little personal economic freedom. They were on loan from the patriarchy. Some, however, found other ways to express their identity, ways that had nothing to do with the jewels weighing them down. They sought to create a beauty not of gold, but of words, a legacy that could not be weighed or reclaimed, even if it meant defying the most powerful man in the empire. We move now to a quieter, more private space within the sprawling zenana. It is a library, its walls lined with niches holding precious, hand-painted manuscripts. The air smells of old paper, leather, and ink. In the center of the room, seated not on a pile of cushions, but at a simple wooden desk, is a woman. She is not adorned with the crushing weight of jewels we just witnessed. Her clothes are elegant but simple, her hands stained with ink, not henna. This is Princess Zeb-un-Nissa, the eldest child of the formidable Emperor Aurangzeb. She is a scholar, a calligrapher, and one of the finest Persian language poets of her generation. The glamorous illusion surrounding a figure, like Zeb-un-Nissa, is that of the blue-stocking princess. She represents the height of Mughal culture and refinement. She presided over a literary salon, a circle of poets and intellectuals who would gather with the appropriate screens and protocols in place to debate philosophy and share their latest work. She is the perfect image of the enlightened princess, her mind as beautifully adorned as her sisters' bodies were with gems. Her poetry, filled with themes of longing, love, and spiritual devotion, seems to fit perfectly within the romantic, mystical world of the court. But pull the curtain back on this serene, scholarly scene. Pick up one of her poems and read not just the lines, but between them. The shocking reality is that Zeb-un-Nissa's beautiful poetry was a radical act of defiance, written under the constant threat of censorship and punishment from her own father. Her creative life was not a sanctioned hobby, it was a secret rebellion. The Emperor Aurangzeb was a man of Orthodox faith. Upon taking the throne, Aurangzeb banned music and dancing at court. He dismissed the court painters and poets. He saw art, and, in particular, romantic and mystical poetry, as frivolous at best and heretical at worst. Imagine the suffocating intellectual environment he created. Zeb-un-Nissa, a woman of profound artistic and spiritual sensibility, was trapped in a court that had become a cultural desert. To write about a love for God that used the language of a passionate, almost erotic, love for a human beloved was deeply suspect to the orthodox. So, she wrote in secret. She published her work under a pen name, Mafai, which means the hidden one. It was a name that perfectly captured her existence, a brilliant mind and a passionate heart, hidden away behind the zenana walls and hidden again behind a secret identity. Her rebellion was not just in the content of her poems, but in the very act of writing them. She was a woman daring to have a public voice, even a disguised one. One famous story, though lightly embellished, captures the tension perfectly. She was secretly in love with a young nobleman at court. The father, suspecting an illicit romance, had the man hidden in a large cauldron of water that was to be heated for a bath, intending to boil him alive. When Zeb-un-Nissa came upon the scene, she understood instantly. Unable to save him, she is said to have recited an impromptu couplet, a line of which contained a clever double meaning, seeming to command the servants to light the fire while secretly lamenting her lover's fate. The story illustrates the tightrope she walked. Her intelligence and poetic skill were her only weapons in a world where her father held the power of life and death. So why was her father, a man who gave her a brilliant education, so opposed to her using it this way? Aurangzeb's worldview was one of absolute control. He saw her poetry not as an accomplishment, but as a symptom of spiritual waywardness. The story ends in tragedy. Eventually, her rebellious spirit went too far. Her punishment was swift and severe. The poet, the scholar, the hidden one, was stripped of her titles and her fortune and imprisoned in the fortress of Salimgar in Delhi. She would spend the last 20 years of her life as a political prisoner. Her caged voice, once a secret stream of defiance within the zenana, was finally silenced by literal stone walls. She died in prison, a poet punished for her words. But while some women fought their confinement with words, others, in a surprising twist, embraced it, using their seclusion to build empires of a completely different kind. Let's turn our attention from the poet's ink-stained fingers to another, equally powerful set of hands within the zenana. You see a woman, perhaps the emperor's mother, or a senior wife, who is not composing a verse or admiring a jewel. She is dictating a letter to a scribe. The language she uses is not one of love or philosophy. It is the sharp, precise language of commerce. She speaks of tonnage, of customs duties, of profit margins and shipping routes. She is surrounded not by poets, but by financial agents and eunuch administrators, who listen to her every word with rapt attention. The glamorous illusion of the zenana is that it was a world completely detached from money. The male-dominated world of trade, of ships and caravans, of noisy ports and dusty markets, was thought to be the absolute antithesis of the serene feminine sanctuary of the zenana. But look closer at the documents spread before this woman. They are shipping manifests, letters of credit, and account ledgers. The shocking reality is that some of the most powerful women of the Mughal Empire were also some of its most successful and ruthless business tycoons. They owned and operated massive trading enterprises from deep within the confines of their gilded cage. They didn't just spend the empire's wealth, they actively and skillfully created it. The most famous of these entrepreneurial royals was Jahanara Begum, the eldest child of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal. From her secluded apartments in the Red Fort of Agra, hundreds of miles away, Jahanara managed her commercial empire with an iron fist. She owned her own ships. One of them, aptly named the Sahibi, was one of the largest vessels trading in the Indian Ocean. She financed its voyages, chose its captains, and dictated its cargo. Imagine the scene. A group of grim-faced English or Dutch merchants from the East India Company are ushered into a chamber in Agra. Instead, they are made to negotiate with Jahanara's financial agents, eunuchs and scribes who act as her proxies. Every offer and counter-offer is relayed back to the princess, who sits behind a screen, listening to the entire negotiation. She makes the final decision. Jahanara was not alone. Her great-aunt, the formidable Nur Jahan, was also a brilliant businesswoman. She held monopolies on the trade of certain goods, like indigo and textiles. This meant that no one could trade these items without her permission, and without giving her a cut of the profits. She used her political power to crush her commercial rivals. So how was this possible? Why was this one area of male-dominated life open to women who were otherwise so restricted? The answer lies in a fascinating intersection of practicality and privilege. Their royal status meant they could secure favorable trade terms, monopolies and tax breaks that ordinary merchants could only dream of. Their name alone opened doors and intimidated competitors. But most importantly, the system of purdah created a unique business model. Since they could not leave the zenana to manage their affairs in person, they were forced to become master delegators. They built up cadres of trusted agents, eunuchs, female relatives and male employees who were managed by intermediaries. This forced them to think strategically, to manage complex systems from a distance, much like a modern CEO managing a global corporation via email and video conferencing. Their seclusion, in a strange way, fostered a more sophisticated, systems-level approach to business. They were not market traders haggling in the dust, they were the unseen strategists moving vast sums of wealth across continents. The great trading ship, the Sahibi, has just returned to port, its holds laden with spices, silks and silver from distant lands. The profits from this single voyage are enough to build a new caravanserai or fund a wing of the palace. Within the zenana, the news is received with quiet satisfaction. The princess who owns the ship, perhaps Jahanara, directs a portion of the profits to be distributed as alms to the poor of Agra. She sponsors the feeding of thousands of people at the shrine of a Sufi saint and orders the construction of a new public well. This is the pious face of imperial wealth. The glamorous illusion is one of deep, serene faith and effortless charity. The women of the Mughal zenana, particularly in the later periods, were portrayed as paragons of Islamic piety. They were patrons of religious architecture, founders of mosques and schools, and providers of charity on a massive scale. Their faith was a public performance, a key part of the dynasty's legitimacy. By associating themselves with acts of devotion and public good, they reinforced the idea that their wealth was a divine blessing, a trust to be used for the welfare of their subjects. They are depicted in historical accounts as being in a state of constant, prayerful communion with God, their immense riches and power tempered by humility and a deep concern for the spiritual and physical well-being of the populace. But let's draw back the curtain of public piety and look at the private fears that plague these same women. A rumor has just arrived from the port city of Surat, carried faster than any ship. A strange sickness has broken out among the dockworkers. It is aggressive, fast-moving, and fatal. The shocking reality behind the serene faith was a raw, primal terror of disease, particularly the plague. Imagine the atmosphere inside the zenana when the news of the plague's arrival hits. The carefully maintained calm shatters. The plague was an invisible, indiscriminate killer. It didn't care about rank or wealth. A servant could bring it in on her clothes, a shipment of fruit could carry infected fleas, a guard could catch it in the city and bring it back to the palace. Suddenly, the enclosed, crowded world of the zenana transforms from a sanctuary into a death trap. The very proximity that fostered the intelligence networks we spoke of now becomes a terrifying liability. Sickness could spread like wildfire through the hundreds of women and servants living in such close quarters. In these moments of terror, the official orthodox faith was often not enough. It provided comfort and a framework for understanding suffering as God's will, but on a gut level, people craved more immediate, more tangible forms of protection. This is where the world of folk belief and magic came roaring back to the surface. While the empress might be publicly endowing a mosque, she would be privately consulting with an astrologer to determine the most auspicious time to flee the city. She would wear special talismans or tawis, prepared by a holy man. These were small lockets containing a miniature folded-up verse from the Quran, or sometimes a magic square of numbers and symbols believed to hold protective power. They would hang precious stones over the doorways, believing that emeralds could ward off pestilence. They would burn specific types of incense, not just the fragrant ones for pleasure, but pungent, medicinal ones like wild rue, whose smoke was thought to drive away evil spirits and the miasma of disease. Remember the hakimas? The female physicians? Their humoral medicine would be in overdrive, prescribing hot remedies to counteract the cold nature of the plague, but their efforts were largely futile. In their desperation, women would resort to any and every belief system available. Why this stark contrast between public, orthodox faith and private, magical practice? The reason is that they weren't seen as contradictory. For the people of the Mughal era, the world was a porous place, where the physical and spiritual were deeply intertwined. An epidemic was not just a biological event, it was a spiritual one. Therefore, you had to fight it on all fronts. Public prayer and charity were essential to appease God, but a magical amulet was a necessary shield against the unseen forces of evil. The decision has been made. The plague is closing in on the capital, and the court must move. The emperor, his family, and the entire central government will travel to the cooler, safer climes of Kashmir or another provincial capital until the danger has passed. From the outside, this is a spectacle of unimaginable grandeur. The royal procession is a glittering river of humanity and wealth, stretching for miles across the dusty plains of northern India. Elephants sway under the weight of golden howdahs, their tusks banded with silver. Lines of camels are laden with treasure chests and luxurious tents. The imperial cavalry, in gleaming armor, rides alongside. It is a mobile city, a testament to the emperor's power to command not just a palace, but the entire landscape. The glamorous illusion is one of a magnificent, triumphant progress. For the women of the zenana, this move is depicted as a luxurious adventure. They travel in ornate, covered palanquins, or dolis, carried on the shoulders of liveried bearers. These are like miniature, mobile rooms, draped in silks and brocades, with cushions and refreshments inside. Or they ride in special curtained carriages, sometimes pulled by bullocks, with gold-tipped horns. The most high-ranking women, like the emperor's mother or his chief wives, ride atop their own elephants, secluded within elaborate veiled structures. It seems like a grand royal tour, a chance to see the empire from the comfort and security of their mobile boudoirs. The journey is presented as a seamless extension of the palace, a rolling paradise insulated from the discomforts of the road. But let's pull back the silk curtains of one of those palanquins and feel the reality of the journey. The shocking truth is that this glittering procession was a grueling, miserable, and incredibly vulnerable ordeal. The zenana on the move was a prison in motion. You are crammed inside a small, swaying, claustrophobic box for 8 to 10 hours a day. There is no suspension. You feel every single jolt and rut in the rough, unpaved road. The motion is relentless, a nauseating, rocking and swaying movement that leaves you dizzy and sick. The air inside your little box is stifling, thick with dust kicked up by the thousands of soldiers, animals and baggage handlers marching ahead of you. The dust coats everything, your clothes, your face, your food. Despite the luxurious drapes, privacy is non-existent. The palanquin bearers are just feet away, their grunts and chants a constant soundtrack to your misery. You are utterly dependent on them. If they stumble, you are thrown against the walls of your cage. The heat is unbearable. The Indian sun beats down on the brocaded roof, turning your little sanctuary into a suffocating oven. The elite female guards, the Urjubagis, ride alongside, enforcing the strict rules of Purdah even on the march. You cannot peek out. You cannot get a breath of fresh air. You see the world only as a sliver of dusty ground through a gap in the curtains. And what about basic human needs? The stop for the latrine is a major logistical operation. An area must be cordoned off with canvas screens, the kannats, to create a temporary, private enclosure. It is a slow, cumbersome process, and therefore, stops are infrequent. For hours on end, you are forced to simply endure the discomfort. The threat of attack is also constant. Though protected by thousands of soldiers, a procession this large and valuable is a tempting target for rebels or bandits. A sudden skirmish could turn your gilded cage into a trap. There are accounts of palanquins being dropped in the chaos of a raid, their occupants left stranded and terrified. Why was this deeply unpleasant and inefficient mode of travel the standard for the most powerful women in the land? The reason, once again, comes down to the non-negotiable principle of Purdah and the public performance of status. A royal woman could not simply ride a horse. To be seen on horseback, exposed to the elements and the public gaze, would be an unacceptable breach of honor. The physical separation, the veil, had to be maintained at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing all comfort, safety, and practicality. The palanquin and the covered howdah were not designed for travel, they were designed to be mobile symbols of seclusion and prestige. The very inefficiency of the procession was part of its message. The ability to move thousands of people and vast amounts of treasure at a snail's pace across the country was a demonstration of the emperor's logistical might. It showed that he could afford to be slow, that he had the resources to overcome any obstacle. The comfort of the individuals, including the women in their swaying boxes, was secondary to the political theatre of the event. The entire ordeal was a public declaration that the rules of the court, the hierarchies and the rituals, were so powerful that they could be imposed even on the wilderness. The women endured this mobile misery because their status depended on it. To complain would be to show weakness, to admit that the illusion of effortless grace was, in fact, an exhausting, painful burden. This relentless pressure to maintain the illusion, even under the most grueling circumstances, shaped the women of the zenana. It bred a particular kind of resilience and a sharp understanding of the true nature of power. And for the most senior woman in the entire imperial structure, the Queen Mother, this understanding was not just a tool for navigating court life, but a weapon for survival in the most dangerous game of all, the imperial succession. The grueling journey is over. The court has settled into its new, temporary home, and the immediate threat of the plague has subsided. But a different kind of sickness lingers in the air. Political uncertainty. The emperor is growing older. His sons, all capable and fiercely ambitious young men, are beginning to circle the throne like sharks. In this tense, watchful environment, one figure commands more respect and holds more subtle power than any other. She is the Padshah Begum, the Empress Dowager, the mother of the reigning emperor. Or, in this case, the mother of the potential future emperors. The glamorous illusion of the Queen Mother is that of a revered, semi-retired matriarch. She is the wise elder, the living embodiment of the dynasty's history and continuity. Having fulfilled her primary duty by producing the emperor, she now enjoys a life of serene dignity, basking in the love and respect of her powerful son. She is seen as being above the political fray, a gentle, unifying presence who offers sage advice and moral guidance. Her official role is to be a symbol of stability, a treasured link to the past, and a source of maternal comfort to the ruler of the empire. She is the ultimate success story of the zenana, the woman who won the great game and can now enjoy her golden years in peace. But let's follow this revered matriarch into her private chambers, away from the performing stage of the court. The shocking reality is that the Queen Mother's position was often the most precarious and politically fraught in the entire empire. Her retirement was a fiction. She was, in fact, the chief strategist and often the most ruthless player in the brutal, bloody game of succession. Her primary job was not to unify her sons, but to play them against each other in a deadly gambit for her own survival and the survival of her preferred lineage. Here is the terrible logic of the Mughal succession. Unlike in European monarchies, there was no law of primogeniture. The eldest son did not automatically inherit the throne. The principle was, brutally and simply, taht ya tahte, throne or the coffin. All the sons of an emperor were considered to have an equal right to rule, and they were expected to fight it out upon their father's death. The one who emerged victorious, having killed or imprisoned all his brothers, was considered to have been chosen by God. It was a system that guaranteed a civil war with every new generation. For the mother of these princes, this was a waking nightmare. The sons she had raised were now her rivals, and she knew that only one could survive. Her survival, her status, and her life depended entirely on backing the winning horse. If the son she supported lost, she would, at best, be exiled to a dreary life of imprisonment in a fortress. At worst, she could be executed or left to rot in obscurity by the new emperor, her victorious stepson or nephew. So, she could not afford to be a gentle, unifying presence. She had to be a kingmaker. Imagine her cold calculations. She would assess her son's strengths and weaknesses with a brutal clarity that only a mother could possess. Which one was the better general? Which one had the loyalty of the most powerful nobles? Which one was the most cunning? Which one was the most ruthless? She would use the Zenana's intelligence network, that web of whispers we discussed, to gather information on her sons' plans, their allies, and their secrets. She would then use her own influence and wealth to build alliances for her chosen candidate. She would secretly send money to generals to secure their loyalty. She would use her connections with other powerful women in the Zenana to create a faction supporting her son. She would actively sow discord among her other sons, trying to weaken them. She might subtly pass information to one son about another's plans, hoping they would exhaust each other in skirmishes before the final conflict. It was a horrifying tightrope act. She had to maintain the public illusion of a loving, impartial mother while privately engaging in a campaign of espionage and political maneuvering that would decide who lived and who died. The story of Shah Jahan's succession is a prime example. His mother and his powerful stepmother Nur Jahan were key players, manipulating events from behind the Zenana's walls, each backing different candidates for the throne. Their political chess match had fatal consequences for the princes who were their pawns. Why was such a brutal system in place? It was seen as a form of political Darwinism. The belief was that the war of succession, as bloody as it was, ensured that the strongest, most capable, and most ruthless man would become emperor. A prince who couldn't conquer his own brothers was not fit to rule and defend the empire. It was a trial by fire that, in theory, prevented weak rulers from taking the throne and leading the dynasty to ruin. The Queen Mother's gambit, her heart-wrenching necessity of choosing between her children, was simply an accepted part of this brutal political ecosystem. Her role was not to prevent the bloodshed, but to ensure that her bloodline, through her chosen son, was the one that ultimately sat on the throne. Her actions were not born of malice, but of a desperate pragmatism. She was a product of a system that equated power with survival. The revered matriarch, the symbol of dynastic stability, was in fact the chief architect of the managed chaos that perpetuated the empire. But even the most brilliant strategist cannot hold back the tide of history. As the empire itself began to face internal decay and external threats, the grand illusion of Mughal power began to fray, and the women of the Zenana, for so long at the center of the web, found their gilded cage beginning to rust. Let's move forward in time. The age of the great emperors for Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and even the formidable Aurangzeb is passing. The empire, which once seemed as eternal and unshakable as the mountains, is now showing deep cracks. The treasury is being drained by constant warfare and rebellion. The authority of the central government is weakening in the provinces. You are standing once more in the great courtyard of the Zenana. But something has changed. The fountains still play, but perhaps one is dry, its pipes broken and awaiting a repair that never comes. The gardens are still beautiful, but weeds are beginning to creep in at the edges of the flower beds. The glamorous illusion of the Mughal court was one of timeless, unchanging opulence. The poetry, the art, the architecture all speak of a golden age, a paradise on earth that would last forever. For the women inside the zenana, this illusion was their reality. Their world was designed to feel permanent, a bubble of perfect luxury sealed off from the harsh realities of the outside world. The flow of jewels, silks, and perfumes was as constant and as natural as the rising of the sun. The power they wielded from behind their screens seemed absolute and eternal. The system, for all its cruelties, was stable. But now, as you look around this subtly decaying paradise, you can see the shocking reality of the empire's decline. The fraying of the empire is reflected in the fraying of the silken tapestry of zenana life. The changes are small at first, almost unnoticeable. The quality of the silks is not what it once was, the dyes are a little less vibrant. The pearls arriving from the coast are a little smaller, a little less lustrous. The emperor's gifts to his wives and concubines become less frequent, less extravagant. The vast allowances that funded the trading empires of women like Jahanara are cut, and then cut again. The flow of wealth, which had been a mighty river, slows to a trickle. This economic decline has a profound and devastating impact on the social fabric of the zenana. The intricate system of patronage and power, which was lubricated by money, begins to break down. A high-ranking princess who once supported a retinue of hundreds of attendants, musicians, poets, servants is now forced to let them go. These women, who knew no other life, are cast out into a world for which they are completely unprepared. The competition within the zenana, always fierce, becomes desperate and vicious. With fewer resources to go around, the rivalries are no longer about securing a position of greater influence, but about securing basic survival. The web of whispers, once a tool for statecraft, devolves into bitter, desperate squabbles over a new dress or an extra portion of food. The physical decay of the palaces mirrors the political decay of the state. As the emperors become weaker, becoming puppets in the hands of powerful nobles or foreign invaders, the maintenance of the vast royal buildings is neglected. You can see plaster cracking on the walls, revealing the brickwork beneath. A priceless pietra dura inlay of a flower loses a carnelian petal, which is swept away by a servant rather than being replaced. The silver panels on a door are pried off by a looter during a period of chaos and replaced with plain wood. The gilded cage is losing its gilding, revealing the stark, iron bars underneath. Why did this happen? The decline of the Mughal Empire was a complex process, driven by a combination of factors. Aurangzeb's endless wars in the Deccan had drained the treasury. The rise of new powers, like the Marathas in the west and the English East India Company on the coasts, chipped away at Mughal territory and trade routes. The system of government, so effective under strong rulers, became corrupt and inefficient under weaker ones. The empire had simply overextended itself and was collapsing under its own weight. For the women of the zenana, this was a disaster of unimaginable proportions. Their entire world, their status, their identity, and their physical safety were tied to the strength of the emperor. As his power evaporated, so did theirs. They were the ultimate insiders, and when the inside began to crumble, they had nowhere to go. There are heartbreaking accounts from the later Mughal period of princesses living in poverty within the once magnificent Red Fort, their clothes in tatters, pleading with British officers for a pension. They were ghosts, haunting the ruins of their own opulent past. The illusion of the zenana was that it was a separate world, a timeless sanctuary. The reality was that it was a sensitive barometer of the empire's health. Its luxury was a direct reflection of the state's prosperity, and its decline was a mirror of the state's decay. The women, who had been the secret keepers of the empire's power, became the silent witnesses to its fall. Their stories, once central to the dynasty's success, began to fade from the official histories, which were now preoccupied with battles and treaties. The voices from behind the screen grew fainter and fainter, until they were almost entirely lost. But the echoes of their presence, their power, and their pain were not erased completely. They linger still, if you know where to look. The year is now 1857. The last Mughal emperor, a frail old poet named Bahadur Shah Zafar, is being put on trial by the British. The great Red Fort of Delhi, for centuries the heart of a vast empire, is now a barracks for foreign soldiers. You walk through the zenana quarters one last time. The fountains are choked with weeds and rubble. The marble screens are broken, their intricate patterns shattered. The rooms that once glittered with silks and jewels are now empty, stripped bare, their walls scarred with graffiti left by soldiers. The air, once heavy with the scent of roses and sandalwood, now smells of dust, decay, and the ashes of a burned-out world. The final, glamorous illusion of the Mughal Empire was its own permanence. It was a dynasty that measured its history in centuries, that built tombs of marble intended to last for eternity. The women of the Zenana, from the powerful Nur Jahan to the tragic Zeb un-Nissa, lived and died within a system they believed was as fixed as the stars. Their struggles, their triumphs, their sacrifices were all for the glory and continuation of a dynasty that seemed indestructible. The official histories they commissioned, the poems they wrote, the gardens they built all were predicated on a belief in a future that would honor and remember them. But here, in these desolate ruins, is the final, shocking reality. The dynasty is gone. The empire has been swept away. And with its fall, the official stories of the women of the Zenana have been almost completely erased. The new rulers, the British, were not interested in the subtle, indirect power of the women's quarters. They were men of commerce and military might, and they wrote a history of India that centered on battles, trade agreements, and male rulers. The Zenana, in their eyes, was a symbol of oriental decadence and backwardness, a place of intrigue and fantasy, but not a place of real historical importance. The complex political and economic roles these women played were dismissed or ignored. The voices from behind the screen were silenced. The web of whispers was broken. The business empires run from behind the veil vanished without a trace in the new economic order. The physical world of the Zenana was dismantled, its treasures looted and sent to museums in London, its buildings repurposed or left to crumble. The women who had once been at the very center of an empire's power became ghosts in their own homes, their stories buried under the dust of colonial conquest. The official record, written by the victors, had almost no room for them. It was the ultimate act of silencing, an erasure more complete than any censorship orangs could have imagined. But why was this erasure so total? It was because the power of the Zenana women was so deeply intertwined with the specific structure of the Mughal court. Their influence was personal, relational, and secret. It was not recorded in official treaties or battle records. It lived in the whispers, the alliances, the carefully managed perceptions that we have explored together. When the system that gave that power meaning was destroyed, the power itself seemed to vanish. It left few of the kinds of documents that 19th-century Western historians considered real history. They were looking for minutes from a cabinet meeting, not a report on the gossip of the harem. They misunderstood the nature of the Zenana's power, and so they concluded that it had never really existed at all. And yet, the erasure was not absolute. The story doesn't end in this dusty, ruined courtyard. The echoes of these women, their influence and their legacy, managed to survive, not in the grand official histories, but in other, more subtle ways. Their architectural patronage remains. The tomb of Itamad ad-Dawla in Agra, a perfect jewel box of a building commissioned by Nur Jahan for her father, still stands. It is the precursor to the Taj Mahal, a testament to her taste and power. The Taj itself, that monument to a woman's love and a woman's pain, still draws millions into its orbit, telling a story that centers, ultimately, on an empress. The poetry of Zeb un-Nissa, the hidden one, was preserved by her devoted followers and rediscovered generations later, her voice of defiance and longing finally finding a new audience. The designs she and other women created for textiles, the floral motifs and flowing patterns, became part of the enduring fabric of Indian art. Their influence seeped into the cultural DNA of the subcontinent. Their stories, though officially erased, lived on in oral traditions, in folk songs, in the memories passed down through families. They could not be entirely extinguished. They became what they had so often been in life, a secret, a whisper, a hidden truth waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to look past the official narrative and listen closely for the echoes in the empty marble halls. The journey we have taken tonight has been one of pulling back curtains, of looking behind screens, and of finding the powerful, brilliant, and often tragic realities behind the beautiful illusions. We have felt the weight of the jewels, smelled the poison in the perfume, and heard the whispers of spymasters. The women of the Zenana were not passive dolls in a gilded cage. They were rulers, artists, spies, and entrepreneurs. They were complex human beings who navigated an extraordinary world with intelligence and courage. Theirs is a story of power found in powerlessness, of freedom found in confinement, and of voices that, against all odds, refused to be completely silenced.